I first arrived in Sunset Vista, a planned community nestled by rolling hills on a mild spring morning. The place struck me as idyllic. Each home had a neat lawn, blooming flower beds, and identical mailboxes. A large sign at the entrance read, "Sunset Vista," where neighbors become friends. The real estate agent promised a welcoming environment, complete with a spacious clubhouse and a shared pool. After living in cramped apartments for years, I craved the tranquility this suburban enclave offered. My new house sat near the back of the subdivision, on a street lined with sycamores. As the moving truck unloaded, a tall, blonde-haired woman approached. Her hair was styled in a precise bob, and she wore a crisp pastel blouse. Gripping a thick clipboard emblazoned with the Sunset Vista HOA logo, she introduced herself, Karen Bowman, the HOA president. Her smile was polite but had a tightness around the corners. "Welcome to Sunset Vista," Karen said, eyes scanning me as though she expected an immediate rule violation. "I'm here to ensure you have our community guidelines. We pride ourselves on maintaining a peaceful, orderly atmosphere. I do hope you'll find it to your liking." She handed me a binder thick with bylaws, pages detailing landscaping rules, trash bin placement times, mandatory color palettes for doors, and so forth. I thanked her awkwardly. She gave a small nod, then marched off to her next target. I sensed, with a mild pang of nerves, that she was someone who enjoyed her power over the neighborhood. At the time, I had no inkling just how controlling Karen could be, or how she would clash with the language exchange group I'd soon help organize. All I wanted was a fresh start in a peaceful community, away from the city's hustle. But as I'd learn, behind the uniform mailboxes and the trimmed hedges lurked the potential for petty disputes, and in Karen's case, a capacity for intolerance that would shock us all. Within a few weeks of moving in, I set about exploring Sunset Vista's communal amenities. The polished white community center, perched by a small pond, doubled as a clubhouse and event space. Inside, I found a lounge area, a row of meeting rooms, and a small library. The HOA used it for monthly board meetings, holiday parties, and casual gatherings. A friendly neighbor, Janine, told me it was open for residents to reserve if they had a group meeting or social club. All they needed was to fill out a short request form, typically rubber-stamped by the board. Delighted by this, I began brainstorming ways to engage with the neighbors. I'd spent a few years abroad, picking up Spanish and some rudimentary French. I was also taking a course in American Sign Language, ASL. Living in a diverse city had instilled in me a love for language exchange events, where people with different mother tongues gather to practice and chat. The concept was simple. Locals learn or improve a new language by conversing with native or advanced speakers, and vice versa. So, I reached out to a local college where I sometimes attended part-time classes. A professor friend, Dr. Alvarez, taught in the linguistics department. He said the college occasionally sponsored language tables where students practiced conversational skills, but they were seeking off-campus community venues too. We both realized Sunset Vista's community center might be a perfect satellite site. Residents who wanted to improve their Spanish or French or any other language could gather. Meanwhile, college students seeking community service or just extra conversation practice could come as well. We hammered out a plan. We'd host a language exchange meetup every Wednesday evening, free and open to all. The local college would provide some small funds for materials, like printed learning sheets or basic refreshments. The entire operation would be low-key, friendly, beneficial to those wanting to practice new languages, and perhaps a chance for cross-cultural connections in a suburban environment. On paper, it sounded like a wonderful synergy. Little did I guess that Karen might label it annoying or suspect it brought undue noise, or that she'd try to shut it down entirely. Excited, I prepared a formal request for the HOA board to reserve the community center's lounge on Wednesday evenings from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. I typed up a short proposal, Sunset Vista Language Exchange Night, sponsored by the local college. Goal: foster cultural unity, help residents learn languages, free to attend. Ms. Jenkins, the board secretary, told me to present it at the next board meeting for an official vote. At the meeting, the board members sat at a long table in the community center's main hall. About 20 residents looked on from folding chairs. Karen presided, wearing her usual pastel blouse and that austere expression. As each agenda item passed, we finally reached new proposed community use, language exchange. Ms. Jenkins introduced me to speak. I explained the concept, neighbors practicing Spanish, French, ASL, or whichever languages people were interested in, facilitated by some college volunteers or language students who could guide conversation. To my relief, the board members seemed intrigued. Ms. Jenkins and Mr. Kovacs expressed immediate enthusiasm. How refreshing. We rarely see cultural or educational clubs here. Another member, Ms. Reynolds, said the schedule seemed fine if the lounge was free. A few residents in attendance expressed interest, saying they might come to brush up on high school Spanish or to meet new people. Karen, however, asked a few pointed questions. How many outside people might come? Are we sure we want non-residents entering our facility weekly? It might disrupt the quiet environment if there's a large crowd speaking multiple languages at once. I assured her the plan was for modest groups, maybe 10 to 15 people at a time, plus a handful of college volunteers. We'd keep noise at a normal conversation level. Also, we could limit it to primarily residents, allowing outside participants only if they register or if they're from the sponsoring college. Ms. Jenkins saw no major problem with that. The board voted 4-1 to approve, with Karen casting the lone dissent. But the majority ruled, so we got the green light. I left the meeting feeling triumphant, not realizing Karen's minority vote portended future trouble. With the board's official approval, Dr. Alvarez from the college arranged for a few language-savvy students to help. We posted flyers around Sunset Vista's bulletin boards and on the college campus. The inaugural meetup took place on a Wednesday evening. About a dozen folks attended, mostly neighbors, plus a couple of college students. We formed small tables, one for Spanish conversation, another for French, another for those dabbling in basic ASL. The atmosphere was lively but not rowdy. People sipped water or tea, tried out phrases, laughed at their own mistakes, shared stories of travels or cultural experiences. The lounge wasn't loud, more akin to a mild hum of voices in various tongues. Everyone seemed to enjoy it. We ended on a cheerful note, planning to meet again next week. Linda, a neighbor who'd studied abroad in France, told me she was thrilled to brush up on her French without driving to a city meetup. Over the next few weeks, attendance grew slightly. A few more residents joined, plus new college volunteers. We hovered around 15 to 20 participants each session. The college provided some short worksheets, conversation prompts, and snacks. People often brought potluck items, some Spanish tapas, French pastries, or local treats. We even had a woman teaching basic Italian greetings. Everyone was respectful, cleaning up thoroughly afterward. The vibe was relaxed, bridging generational and cultural gaps in the serene setting of Sunset Vista's community center. Yet, behind the scenes, Karen apparently disliked seeing the lounge lights on Wednesday nights, the groups chatting in unfamiliar languages. She rarely came inside, but we'd glimpse her or her black SUV lingering outside. A volunteer told me Karen had poked her head in once, scowling at the Spanish table. The volunteer overheard Karen muttering something about unnecessary foreign chatter. It felt ominous. But since we had official board approval, we pressed on, hoping Karen's negativity would remain a minor nuisance. We had no clue she'd soon attempt to ban us entirely. A month into the meetups, Ms. Jenkins informed me that Karen had put a new agenda item on the upcoming HOA board meeting, discussion of language exchange disturbances. Surprised, I asked if any formal complaints had been logged. Ms. Jenkins said only Karen had complained about excess noise, outsiders, and extended lounge usage. No other residents reported issues. The lounge was typically unused on Wednesday evenings anyway, but Karen insisted it was disruptive. We attended the board meeting in force, myself, Dr. Alvarez, and a half-dozen neighbors who regularly joined the meetups. When the agenda item arose, Karen launched into a speech about how the language group was annoying some residents who want to enjoy quiet evenings, claiming too many people from outside the community roam the halls, and that the board never intended for a weekly open-to-all event. Ms. Jenkins countered that the board voted in favor, fully aware it was weekly, and the turnouts were modest, not crowds. Dr. Alvarez politely explained the benefits. Our students help residents improve foreign language skills. It fosters cross-cultural understanding. We have no record of any noise complaints beyond Ms. Whitfield's personal dissatisfaction. The gatherings end by 9 p.m., well before quiet hours. Karen tried to brand it as a public event with random individuals, but Ms. Reynolds retorted that participants sign in, "We have a known contact from the college, and no security issues had arisen." Another board member, Mr. Kovacs, asked if we had data on actual attendance. I shared that typically 15 to 20 attend, mostly residents, plus 2 to 3 college volunteers. Karen's claims of large, outsider crowds were unfounded. The board again voted 4-1 to continue the program. Karen's motion to restrict or remove the language exchange failed. Fuming, Karen demanded the matter be revisited in the next monthly meeting, claiming she had more evidence. The majority was annoyed. Ms. Jenkins privately told me to watch out. Karen might attempt some underhanded method. My heart sank, realizing we were locked in an ongoing battle with the HOA president who disdained foreign chatter in her perfect suburb. We wondered, how far would she go to kill the Meetups? In the days following that board meeting, we encountered bizarre new regulations posted on the lounge door. A typed note read, "All group usage must be 100% residents only, ID checks required. No more than 10 people at once. Meeting must conclude by 8 p.m. The signature at the bottom was from Karen Bowman, HOA president. No mention of the rest of the board. It contradicted the prior official stance, allowing the language group up to 9 p.m. and some outside participants from the college. Ms. Jenkins confirmed the board hadn't approved these new rules. We realized Karen had unilaterally posted them. A few days later, she installed a sign-up sheet outside the lounge, with disclaimers about limited occupancy. The next Wednesday, when we arrived for the meetup, we found Karen physically guarding the door, insisting on checking IDs to ensure participants were residents. She turned away 2 college volunteers, telling them the lounge was off-limits to non-residents. I tried explaining the board had greenlit the presence of official volunteers from the sponsoring college. Karen sneered that the policy changed, pointing to her typed note. We left that evening frustrated, forced to hold a truncated session with fewer participants. The environment felt tense, overshadowed by Karen's glowering presence. Some participants gave up, not wanting confrontation. Others insisted we stand firm. Ms. Jenkins promised to raise the issue again, but with the next board meeting weeks away, Karen had found a cunning way to sabotage the meetups in the interim. I called Dr. Alvarez in dismay. He said the college was perplexed. Official approvals were overshadowed by a single HOA president's vendetta. They considered bringing in a legal perspective or contacting the rest of the board. But we decided to escalate carefully, not wanting to polarize the community. Meanwhile, word spread that Karen believed the group was bringing in foreigners. A neighbor overheard her rant about hearing strange languages echoing down the hall. The xenophobic undertone alarmed us. This wasn't just about noise or resident rules. It seemed more like intolerance of cultural exchange. In response to Karen's unilateral crackdown, I teamed up with Ms. Jenkins, Dr. Alvarez, and a few dedicated neighbors to gather evidence of the group's real nature. We collected sign-in sheets showing that typically 80% of participants were indeed residents, the rest being official volunteers or invited guests from the college. We compiled testimonies from neighbors who enjoyed the sessions, praising the communal benefit and stating no disruptive noise. Dr. Alvarez relayed that the college's Office of Community Engagement was willing to step in, clarifying that the language exchange program was partly funded by a small grant encouraging off-campus outreach. If the HOA's president was effectively blocking it, the college might contact the entire HOA board or even local officials, highlighting the educational and cultural value. Some neighbors recommended we do just that, believing Karen's new rules had no legal standing. Miss Jenkins arranged an informal meeting with the rest of the board, minus Karen, explaining the situation. They were appalled that Karen was forging new restrictions without a board vote. Mr. Kovacs recommended drafting an official letter stating the language exchange was still permitted under the original board resolution, rejecting Karen's attempts to override it. Meanwhile, Dr. Alvarez approached the college's public relations department, who found the story of a suburban HOA blocking cross-cultural learning quite newsworthy. They threatened to bring local media attention if necessary. The fear of negative publicity might deter Karen. We weighed that approach carefully, not wanting an all-out PR war, but recognizing it might force Karen to back down. We decided we'd attend the next official HOA board meeting en masse, presenting our data, the college's stance, and demanding Karen rescind her false rules. If she refused, we'd consider more extreme measures. However, we still underestimated how far Karen would go. She'd soon attempt a total ban, calling the Meetups illegal gatherings and ordering them shut down entirely. One Wednesday evening, about 3 weeks after Karen posted her phony rules, we arrived at the community lounge for the language meetup. We found the doors locked. A notice taped there read, "Facility closed for maintenance. No entry without authorization." We had no prior notice of any maintenance. Ms. Jenkins, who held a board position, was clueless. No mention was made of maintenance at the last board discussion. Inside, we spotted lights off, and the door was indeed locked from the inside with a chain. Some participants milled about outside, confused. A volunteer from the college, a graduate student named Lucia, tried calling Ms. Jenkins, who hurried over with her own key. She discovered the lock jammed from the inside. Looking through a side window, we glimpsed Karen inside, fiddling with a mop and bucket as though she was cleaning. She saw us peering in, turned off the overhead lights, and retreated. Ms. Jenkins banged on the door. "Karen, open up. There's no scheduled maintenance. The board never authorized this." Silence. We realized Karen was physically blocking our access, contriving a maintenance closure. Furious, Miss Jenkins threatened to call the rest of the board or the police if Karen refused to unlock the door. Eventually, Karen emerged from a side exit, brandishing a ring of keys. She insisted the lounge needed deep cleaning, so it couldn't be used. "You can't override me. I have the authority to close facilities for unsanitary conditions," she proclaimed. Ms. Jenkins called that nonsense. The lounge was fine earlier in the day. Nevertheless, Karen refused to relinquish the keys, effectively shutting down our meetup. People grumbled, some leaving in frustration. Lucia tried to reason with Karen, who repeated that the group is not authorized anymore, referencing the new rules. Ms. Jenkins argued those rules weren't valid, but Karen just pointed to her emergency power. We stood outside in the cooling evening air, powerless. Ms. Jenkins indicated she'd schedule an emergency session with the board. I realized we might have to escalate to the college or local municipality. This wasn't just about a difference of opinion. Karen was forcibly denying us use of a communal facility we had official board approval for. Meanwhile, Dr. Alvarez, who arrived late, was appalled. "This is blatant sabotage." He said the college might well send a formal letter or contact local media. At that point, it felt inevitable. Karen's xenophobia or intolerance had boiled over, and she was determined to ban the annoying foreign language chatter. The day after Karen's stunt, Miss Jenkins convened an urgent board meeting, minus Karen initially, explaining how the lounge closure was orchestrated without board consent. The other board members were outraged. Mr. Kovacs said, "She's abusing her position. We never authorized any maintenance or closure." They resolved to send an official letter to Karen demanding she reopen the lounge for the scheduled meetups. Simultaneously, Dr. Alvarez and the college's Office of Community Engagement drafted a formal notice to the HOA board. They praised the existing arrangement, highlighting that the language exchange was partially funded by the college to foster cultural unity. The letter clarified how the college would consider legal avenues if the association's president continued interfering with the program that the board had already sanctioned. They mentioned potential discrimination issues if Karen's opposition was rooted in hostility toward foreign languages or cultures. We presented these letters at a second emergency board gathering with Karen present. She lashed out, calling the college's letter a threat. Ms. Jenkins retorted that it was Karen who threatened the group with illegal closure. The rest of the board reaffirmed the original approval, instructing Karen to remove her spurious rules from the lounge door. Karen refused, claiming, "The group is out of control, bringing outsiders who disrupt the neighborhood." The board demanded evidence of any actual disruption. She had none, just vague complaints. Finally, Ms. Jenkins said, "Karen, if you don't comply, we'll hold a membership vote to remove you as president. We have the power to do so under the bylaws if you continue acting unilaterally." Karen scoffed, "You'd need majority support. And many residents share my concerns, I assure you." Tension soared. The board ended the meeting with no resolution. Karen refused to relent, but the board insisted the lounge remain open next Wednesday. In parallel, the college's legal counsel began drafting potential suits for breach of agreement, referencing anti-discrimination angles if Karen's targeting was based on language or cultural prejudice. Dr. Alvarez told me the college wouldn't hesitate to defend the program. The stage was set for a final showdown. Either Karen would back down, or the board, with the college's backing, would forcibly remove her or pursue legal measures. The next Wednesday arrived. Ms. Jenkins, Dr. Alvarez, and I arrived at the lounge early. The board had posted a large sign, "Language Exchange Meetup, officially approved. All participants welcome." We unlocked the doors. A crowd of about 25 neighbors and volunteers showed up, determined to continue the session. Everyone felt an undercurrent of apprehension. Would Karen appear with another stunt? Sure enough, about 7:15 p.m., Karen barged in, arms crossed. She saw the group chatting in clusters, some practicing Spanish verbs, others swapping French greetings or showing basic ASL signs. A mild hum of conversation filled the room, far from rowdy. Karen stomped to the center, shouting, "This is an unauthorized gathering. I order you all to leave." The chatter fell silent, all eyes on her. Ms. Jenkins stood up. "Karen," the board reaffirmed the approval. "We have official letters from the college. This is a sanctioned event. You have no authority to cancel it." Karen brandished a piece of paper, proclaiming, "I have complaints from multiple residents about the noise and the foreign chatter echoing. This must stop. We're the majority, not the few who want to babble in other languages." Her voice trembled with anger. The crowd bristled at the implied xenophobia. Dr. Alvarez calmly told her, "Ms. Bowman, your board overcame your veto. The local college funds this. If you forcibly remove us, you risk legal consequences." A hush fell. Karen hesitated, face contorting with fury. She spat out, "I'll do what's necessary to protect this neighborhood from nonsense. If you won't leave, I'm calling the police for trespassing." She pulled out her phone. At this, Mr. Kovacs, another board member, spoke. "We are the legal representatives of the HOA. The building belongs to the association, which, by majority board vote, has invited this group. If you call the police, we will tell them you're acting against official board decisions." The tension peaked. Participants looked uneasy, some stepping back, worried about a scene. After a few moments of standoff, Karen realized she might face humiliation if the police came and learned the board had authorized the event. Ms. Jenkins quietly threatened that if Karen escalated further, the membership would hold an immediate recall vote. Karen's phone call to the police never completed. She glared at us, eyes blazing, then turned on her heel and stormed out. The participants exhaled collectively, relief flooding the room. The session resumed. People were shaken but determined to continue. This was Karen's last attempt at an open confrontation, but her meltdown ironically strengthened the group's resolve. Word of Karen's meltdown that Wednesday night spread swiftly through Sunset Vista. Even some who'd once admired her strict rule realized she was stepping far beyond reason. Ms. Jenkins circulated a petition for a special membership meeting to vote on removing Karen from the presidency. Within days, they gathered more than enough signatures. The recall meeting was scheduled for the following weekend, at the same lounge Karen tried to commandeer. Attendance was massive, with residents packing the space. The board members, except Karen, sat at the front. Karen arrived but refused to sit with them, instead hovering at the side. Ms. Jenkins opened the meeting, stating the sole agenda item, proposal to remove Karen Bowman as HOA president for misconduct and repeated disregard of board authority. She listed Karen's transgressions: attempting to unilaterally ban a board-approved language exchange program, creating unauthorized rules restricting residents and college volunteers, falsely locking the lounge under fabricated maintenance closures, threatening participants and defying repeated board votes, acting with possible xenophobic or discriminatory intent toward foreign language activities. Karen was allowed a chance to speak. She repeated her stance that I was protecting the neighborhood from annoyance from outsiders. She insisted her powers allowed her to respond to resident complaints, but no substantial evidence of real complaints existed beyond her own. The crowd murmured disapproval, some calling her intolerant or controlling. Ms. Jenkins then called for a membership vote. Ballots were distributed: yes to remove Karen, no to retain. After the counting, Ms. Jenkins announced the result: 213 in favor of removal, 39 against. A landslide. Applause and cheers erupted. Karen slumped, face pale. The board declared her presidency terminated effective immediately. Ms. Jenkins would serve as interim president until the next election. The membership also voted to bar Karen from holding any board position for at least 3 years, citing her repeated disregard for democratic processes. As the meeting ended, neighbors broke into animated conversation. Some expressed relief that the petty tyranny had ended. Others worried about Karen's reaction. She swiftly exited, refusing to talk to anyone. Ms. Jenkins told me that was the final punishment: dethroned, humiliated, stripped of her power. She'd remain a homeowner, but with no official authority. Her rule was over. With Karen removed, Ms. Jenkins quickly reaffirmed the language exchange program's indefinite approval. She posted a supportive message on the HOA forum, inviting more neighbors to join. The local college was delighted that the fiasco was resolved. Dr. Alvarez wrote a heartfelt note to Ms. Jenkins, thanking the board for championing cultural unity. Some neighbors who'd been on the fence about trying foreign languages now felt more open, freed from Karen's intimidation. At the next Wednesday session, attendance peaked at over 30 participants. People from different language backgrounds brought homemade snacks. The vibe was celebratory, as though the entire community had triumphed over prejudice. Ms. Jenkins gave a short speech praising the college volunteers, acknowledging the board's unwavering support, and even naming me as the impetus for bridging the neighborhood with the college's resources. In the weeks that followed, the meetups continued smoothly. New languages popped up. A retired teacher offered basic German lessons. A traveling nurse introduced a few phrases of Mandarin. The group's success reverberated, and the local press wrote a small piece about how Sunset Vista fosters cultural unity through language exchange. They mentioned the earlier drama only briefly, focusing on how the HOA overcame internal resistance for the greater good. Karen, meanwhile, largely vanished from community events. Rumor had it she was bitter, but with the membership recalling her, she had no recourse. Some said she was considering selling her home, though no listing appeared immediately. Even if she stayed, her reputation was irreparably damaged. Neighbors remembered her xenophobic remarks and her attempts to ban annoying foreign chatter. The new leadership, led by Ms. Jenkins, steered Sunset Vista toward openness, ironically fulfilling the sign at the entrance, where neighbors become friends. Months later, the language exchange program remained a cornerstone of Sunset Vista's community life. The local college occasionally sponsored cultural events: a small French film night, a Spanish cooking workshop, an ASL performance. People discovered a broader world of friendships and learning right in their suburban clubhouse. As for Karen, the final punishment was clear: removal from HOA presidency via an overwhelming membership vote. Banned from holding board positions for 3 years minimum, due to misconduct. public disgrace among neighbors, losing respect and facing social ostracism. No legal charges were filed, since her transgression was an abuse of power rather than a crime, but the social and leadership consequences were heavy. She became the cautionary tale of how an HOA, Karen, can be dethroned by a determined community unwilling to let intolerance or personal vendettas squash beneficial programs. In the end, Karen faced the humiliation of seeing the language exchange thrive under the new HOA's blessing. She glimpsed neighbors happily speaking Spanish or ASL, forging cross-cultural bonds, everything she once labeled annoying. Meanwhile, the entire community took pride in their expanded worldview. For me, I felt immense satisfaction that we overcame pettiness to celebrate diversity. The final scene, one Wednesday evening, found me conversing with a group in halting French, while Miss Jenkins greeted new arrivals, and a playful group practiced Spanish verbs at another table. The lounge glowed with warm light, laughter, and the pleasant hum of foreign chatter, the very thing Karen had tried so hard to extinguish. Thus ended the saga of HOA Karen, who tried to silence the language exchange meetups, only to be punished by the community and overshadowed by the unstoppable tide of cultural unity.